Here we are again tonight. It is the 22nd of June, and we are in 1 Samuel chapter 4. We're going to go through chapters 4 through 7. And it seems like a lot, but actually these chapters are pretty quick. And it is we take a break from the main events of the life of Samuel, and we follow along with the ark. So what the Ark of the Covenant is the main focus of these chapters. So last week we saw Hannah praying and dedicating her son to the Lord. And Samuel's born. He grows up with Eli, and we learned that Eli's sons Hophni and Phinehas are corrupt. They are taking the Lord's portions from the sacrifices. They are sleeping with the women at the tabernacle. They're just not good dudes. And so they are using their power to abuse the system that God had put in place. And Eli confronts them, but he doesn't tell them to stop. He's like, you gotta go, you know better, but he doesn't really put down a firm hand. He doesn't remove them from their roles. And so they are bringing a curse upon the family of Eli. And so we're going to see all of this pan out. But a man of God came and said to Eli, your sons are going to die on the same day, and you're going to see it, and you're going to die too. And so this is where this is all going to come about. And then we also saw in this the call of Samuel, where the Lord calls out Samuel, Samuel, and he thinks it's Eli. And then Eli actually was like, wait, I know what's happening. God's talking to you. And so he tells him, next time you hear the voice, say, your servant is listening. And so Samuel does this. God shows up, talks to him, gives him the prophecy as well, confirming the prophecy against Eli's family. And Samuel then tells him that. And then the end of chapter 3 runs into chapter 4. And one of the things to keep in mind is all of these chapter numbers and verse numbers were added later, right? So these numbers are not inspired numbers of the Lord. Okay, so because it can be really frustrating if you just jump in to chapter 4 and it says, and Samuel's word came to all Israel. What? Why is that the beginning of chapter 4? That should really be the end of chapter 3. But it's the beginning of chapter 4 here. And one of the ways that this could also be translated, because it goes, and Samuel's word came to all Israel. Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. And so one of the possible translation choices is around the time when the word of Samuel spread throughout Israel, Israel marched out to meet the Philistines for war and encamped by Ebenezer. So there's a tone that the NIV translation doesn't really pick up very well. It really is like Samuel was growing in prominence around the nation of Israel, and at the same time, they went to war. Samuel is not a part of going to war against the Philistines here. So there's two narratives that are branching. And so it's kind of like, if you remember in Lord of the Rings, of course, we all remember Lord of the Rings, but there's a part at the end of Fellowship of the Ring where the party breaks. And so you follow Frodo and Sam, and then the rest of the people are doing their thing over here. And so that's kind of a similar narrative device that's happening in the passage here. It's like Samuel's going to continue going his path. Israel's going its own path, which is a theme that we are picking up throughout the book of Judges. Is Israel's going its own path. It's going its own way. And it's going to continue through most of what we're going to read tonight, is because Israel was rejecting God's commands and laws, then they were going their own path, and things don't work out when you go your own path. And so that's the scene that we're stepping into this evening. So they are going to war against the Philistines. The Israelites, sorry, I'm going to move this out a little bit. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer and the Philistines at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." And so here it's like, all right, they go to battle trying to do things their own way. They lose. And then they're like, well, let's think back to our history. What was it that helps the people have victory over the nations of Canaan? What are we missing that they had then? And they're like, the ark. The ark is the most important thing, because the ark, if you remember, is the symbol for the people of God's presence among them. It is not an idol. It is not something that they're ever supposed to worship, but it's really like a footstool for the Lord in his throne room, right? And so so they're like, all right, if we bring the ark with us, then surely we will win. And so they have the right idea, kind of, but the wrong motive. They want to win, but they want to win their way. And this, nowhere in here do we get any kind of indication that the Lord told them to go and fight against the Philistines. They're just doing it at this point. And so they're on their own path. So verse 4, so the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the Ark of the Covenant of God. And so priests were the ones who were supposed to transport the ark. And if you remember, they're supposed to have these poles and carry it. It's never supposed to be on a cart. It's never supposed to be touched. There's all kinds of rules around the ark. But Hophni and Phinehas, if we remember, are corrupt. They're terrible. And so here, like, anytime you read their name this early on, you should be like, they're bad guys. But they're here, the ones representing the Lord in this effort. And so they're with the ark, but it's not going to go great. Verse 5, when the ark of the Lord's covenant came into the camp, all Israel raised such a great shout that the ground shook. Hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "Oh no, nothing like this has happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? They are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, Philistines, be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So the people are excited that the ark has come, and so they are celebrating that, we have our totem of victory. They're treating it like a superstitious item, not as the symbol of the very presence of God among them. And so they are saying, like, all right, our totem is here. We will surely win. And so they are excited. They're shouting and proclaiming God's victory is coming. But the Philistines hear it, and they said, "No, let's be strong." And they are strong, and they defeat the Israelites. Now, this is a great reversal in all of what we have seen with the ark so far. Wherever the ark went, the people won. And so here we have the ark is there, but they lose. So there's a couple of reasons that they could lose here. They are not, this is not a holy war. This is not something that God commanded them to do. And so God didn't send his presence with them. Could be one of the things. The treating it as a superstitious item instead of God's presence. But also, there's a little bit in this passage that is showing us that the people of the Philistine army understood the power of God better than the Israelites. Because as you look here, it says, these are the gods. Now they think it's like their gods, like a plurality of gods, a pantheon But they're remembering the power of that God that gave the Israelites victory over Egypt, that defeated the Ammonites, the Midianites, all these people that came against the people of Israel. God fought for them. So the Philistines have a greater understanding of who this God is at this stage than the army of Israel. And so they fight, and the Philistines destroy them, essentially. And one of the ways they talk about it, every man fled to his tent. It's not just they ran away, it's they abandoned any kind of military calling at this moment. They're like, I'm going home. And like they probably dropped the weapons, they just ran away. And so they lost 30,000 foot soldiers died. But the two major events here, the ark was captured and Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, died. All of these things are happening in a way where if you read this story, like what's going to happen with the ark? What are we going to do? But as we walk through this, we need to remember that God is in control. God is orchestrating things the way that he has said he is going to do. And as I was preparing this, one of the things that I was just struck with is people talk about like we are losing the godly influence in our culture. We are losing God. People are wandering away. But this is what the Israelites were experiencing, but God is never lost. God does not need to be rescued. God does not need our help. And here we're going to see that they will think that the glory of God has departed, that God is gone, but he's not gone. He's doing things his way. And so we can take comfort knowing that God is never lost. So what happens, verse 12, that same day, a Benjamite ran from the battle line and went to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dust on his head. So he's, the clothes torn is like reminding them that they've been through great hardship. Dust on your head is a sign of mourning. And so he's grieving the loss of the army. When he arrived, there was Eli sitting on his chair by the side of the road, watching, because his heart feared for the ark of God. When the man entered the town and told what had happened, the whole town sent up a cry. So in the previous passage, the ark comes and they send up a shout of victory. Then they hear the ark is gone and they set up a cry and wailing and mourning. And so there's the writer of 1 Samuel has a great artistry in the way he's telling the story. There's these parallels and contrasts throughout. And the whole town set up a cry, and Eli heard the outcry and asked, "What is the meaning of this uproar?" The man hurried over to Eli, who was 98 years old and whose eyes had failed so that he could not see. He told Eli, "I have just come from the battle line. I fled from it this very day." Eli asked, "What happened, my son?" The man who brought the news replied, "Israel fled before the Philistines, and the army has suffered heavy losses. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backward off his chair by the side of the gate. His neck was broken, and he died, for he was an old man, and he was heavy. He had led Israel 40 years. And so as he hears this news about the defeat, that's heartbreaking. He hears that his sons died. He was already told that that was going to happen, that his sons were going to die on the same day. But what really grieves him is losing the ark. And that news, when he heard the ark, that's what made his heart fail. And he fell out of his chair and broke his neck. And we read here like that, he was heavy. One of the reasons that he was heavy was because he was participating in the corruption of Hophni and Phinehas. When they were taking the fat portions from the altar, he was benefiting from that. The priests were eating it, and the priests were Hophni, Phinehas, and Eli. And so he was a part of their corruption. And so, so we like these little details, like, he was heavy because he was literally one of the fat cats, that's fleecing the people. So Eli is not a good dude. And his death is, as the high priest, it's a sad thing for the nation as well. So they lost the ark, they lost the high priest, they lost the two sons of the high priest. The leadership structure for the people of Israel is falling apart. And so it's pretty grim scene. And his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, in verse 19, was pregnant and near the time to deliver. When she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she went into labor and gave birth, but was overcome by her labor pains. As she was dying, the women attending her said, "Don't despair, you have given birth to a son." But she did not respond or pay any attention. She named the boy Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the capture of the ark and the death of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." And so here, in what should be a joyful celebration of a new life, Phinehas' wife dies from the labor, and his name is now, "Where's the glory?" essentially. The full translation is not "the glory has departed from Israel," it's "where's the glory?" Kavod is Hebrew for glory, and it one of the ways you can understand it is weightiness. Like the glory of God is a weightiness that like overwhelms the people. C.S. Lewis has a book called The Weight of Glory. And so he plays with that idea as well. But here, the glory of God is gone. And so she's grieving the loss of her husband, the loss of her father-in-law, the loss of the ark. Where is the glory? And so this is, if you were watching on TV, this is where it would like next week on Samuel, like this would be the cliffhanger to get you to come back to like, what's going to happen? And it would zoom over to the Philistines. And it's like, what's happening in Israel? And the narrative, it doesn't really care about what's happening in Israel right now. It's like, let's see what the ark's up to. And so cut away to chapter 5 of 1 Samuel, and we read, let me just think here one more second before I jump there. So yeah, okay, the glory has left Israel, but God is going to demonstrate his glory in the Philistines, among the Philistines. And so that's an important piece to capture here. There's, like I said, there's contrasts happening throughout the book of 1 Samuel, but in these early chapters, we get the contrast between Eli's family and Samuel, or Hannah and Eli, the Philistines and the Israelites. We get all of these contrasts, and we're going to get contrast between Eli and Samuel, and then we're also going to get a contrast between Saul and David. And so there's a consistent contrasting of that creates a kind of course correction to understanding the ways and the will of God for the people of Israel. And so chapter 5, we're going to start to see the Lord reveal his glory. That's the youth group running around upstairs. We're okay. Just FYI. Verse 1. I'm going to go through 12. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Now, Ebenezer means help stone. That's where this first battle happened. We're going to read another Ebenezer later. That's a different Ebenezer. So it's kind of like Springfield in the different states. There's a bunch of Springfields. There can be a bunch of Ebenezers. We're talking about two different places today. So, but this is where, from the battle at Ebenezer, they took it to Ashdod, which is one of the 5 main cities for the Philistines. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. And the Philistines are believed to be people who came down from like the North Mediterranean. They're called the Sea Peoples in Egyptian literature because they came down on boats and tried to take land along the shore and started in Egypt, and they were repelled and they ended up in the southern part of Canaan. And their god Dagon is there's different depictions of him, but often he is has a fish face. And so the Sea People, they probably adopted him from one of the Canaanite communities and peoples, when they were worshiping Dagon, they're like, we are from the sea. We will also adopt this. And Dagon was their main focus of worship. And so they have a temple for him, and they bring the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. Essentially, the reason for this is they are saying, like, we defeated that nation, and they believed that the ark was that God. So they're like, we will now set it here by Dagon, essentially saying this God now worships Dagon. All right, so it's kind of a power play in their pantheon. And so they have a very supernatural worldview where there is a spiritual battle at work in the world. And they believe, because Dagon gave them victory, that they can subsume any other gods. So when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord, which is confusing because this would have been a big statue. It would have been hard to just push it over. All right, so they took Dagon and put him back in place, which is one of the funny things. Like, if your God needs your assistance, how good is that God? But the following morning, when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and his hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. That is why, to this day, neither the priests of Dagon nor any others who entered Dagon's temple at Ashdod step on the threshold. And so so Dagon falls over. Next day, Dagon's head and hands are cut off. And the significance here is that often with the defeat of kings in the ancient world, they would cut their heads off as a sign of victory. The victors would take the heads of the kings. And so here, the Lord cuts the head off Dagon, and like, it doesn't just like lay right next to it, it's out by the door. It's like, this king doesn't even belong in my presence, is kind of the message there. And then the hands, one of the ways that they would count in the ancient world, they would count casualties of war, and like say, how many people did we kill? So they would cut the hands off, and they would transport the hands in back to say, like, these are the people we defeated. And so in this spiritual battle that's happening in Dagon's temple, his home turf, Yahweh, the Lord, and the Ark of the Covenant is a symbol of his presence. He's not having any of Dagon's presence there. And so there's a little cultural moment here. It was like, because it was on the threshold, the people of the Philistines, they're superstitious. And so it's like, well, we don't want to touch that threshold because Dagon's head was there. And it's a sacred place now. And so kind of like a first baseman, like not stepping on the line, like, or a pitcher not stepping on the first baseline, I should say, like cross over that line so you don't break your mom's back or whatever the superstition is. Like, that's what's happening there. So Dagon is weak and frail. And so pick up verse 6, the Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod. And so remember the glory of God, the weightiness of God has left Israel. The Lord's hand was weighty, was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity. He brought devastation on them and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not stay here with us, because his hand is heavy on us and on Dagon, our God. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and asked them, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? They answered, have the ark of the God of Israel moved to Gath. So they moved the ark of God of Israel. But after they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against that city, throwing it into a great panic. He afflicted the people of the city, both young and old, with an outbreak of tumors. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. As the ark of God was entering Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, they have brought us the ark of God of Israel around us to kill us and our people. So they called together all the rulers of the Philistines and said, send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people. For death had filled the city with panic. God's hand was very heavy on it. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven. So this is super interesting, fascinating, and weird, what we're about to get into. because everywhere the ark goes, the people start getting sick. And they say tumors here, but we don't really know what these tumors are. But one of the things, Chris, you are smiling, I can see it. One of the things that people believe is it's actually they're getting hemorrhoids, like really bad hemorrhoids from the presence of God in the Ark of the Covenant. Like they are miserable. And so people are dying. And so there may be also some kind of dysentery situation. And later we're going to see that there's rats. So there could be a bubonic plague happening as well. There's all kinds of things happening in the cities that the ark moves to, because the weight of God's hand is pressing down on the Philistines. They think that they have power over the God of Israel, but everywhere it goes, it makes them miserable. And so as we read through here, like even as it's coming to Ekron, they're like, no, we don't want that. Return to sender. We do not want this in our town. And even the thought of it coming into town is leading to people dying and panic. And so they decide to send it away. And this is one of those bizarre stories in the Bible that, like, as a pastor, it's like, I don't know how I would preach this. Like, trust the Lord or you're gonna get hemorrhoids. Like, obey God, or what are you gonna do with this? But everywhere that God's ark transports, the people who are mistreating it suffer. And they don't know all that God is up to and all of his power, but they know that he is powerful, and they're able to deduce based on what he did to Dagon in the temple, like wherever this thing goes, trouble follows. And so the presence of God is not to be trifled with. And so they devise a plan in chapter 6. When the ark of the Lord had been in Philistine territory 7 months, the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." They answered, "If you return the ark of God of Israel, do not send it back to him without a gift. By all means, send a guilt offering to him. Then you will be healed, and you will know why his hand has not been lifted from you." The Philistines asked, "What guilt offering should we send to him?" They replied, 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats. Now, knowing what this could be, why would you send a gold representation of a tumor or hemorrhoids to, anyway, it's just a weird image, and it's important that we recognize the weirdness. So send these 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats according to the number of the Philistine rulers, so 1 for each city and 1 for each city king, because the same plague has struck both you and your rulers. Make models of the tumors and of the rats that are destroying the country, and give glory to Israel's God. And so this is where we first see, like, the rats destroying the country. And so there's probably a infestation of rats that are bringing about the plague that is making people sick as well. There are probably also, if it says destroying the country, they're probably infesting like the fields and the crops and destroying the livelihood of the people. And so there's a massive problem happening, more than just the illnesses. It's also destroying their infrastructure, their food. So they're saying, give glory to Israel's God. Perhaps he will lift his hand from you and your gods and your land. Why do you harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh did when Israel's God dealt harshly with them? Did they not send the Israelites out so they could go on their way? And so here again, the story of what God did in Egypt is carried over into the Philistines. They've heard this story. They weren't in the area when the people of Israel were sent out of Egypt, when they were liberated. The Philistines are latecomers to this neighborhood. And so, but the story of what God did for the people of Israel is still being circulated around the region. And so the diviners, the witch doctors essentially are saying, like, don't be like Egypt. Don't harden your hearts, which is just amazing that there's like a level of seriousness with the pagan people that the people of Israel are not taking. And so they're recognizing the hand of God, the heaviness of God's power on the cities that are being affected. And they're like, we don't want to be Pharaoh. We don't want that to happen to us. We need to end this. So they have a plan. Verse 7. Now then, get a new cart ready with 2 cows that have calved and that have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in a chest beside it, put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way. But keep watching it. If it goes up to its own territory towards Beth Shemesh, then the Lord has brought this great disaster on us. But if it does not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us, but that it happened to us by chance. Excuse me. And so this is they're trying to discern what's happening through an oracle. And an oracle is any kind of display of divine providence or divine guidance here. And so they're using creation and the laws of creation to see if God is in this. And so the reason they put it on a cart, which they're not supposed to do, right? They're supposed to carry it on poles, but they don't know that. They put it on a cart, and they take these 2 cows who have calved, and so they have infants somewhere, because they're determining, and they say, if this is God, then he will overrule the instincts of these cows, because as they are walking, they are going to want to go back to their calves. And so take the calves away, pen them up, and if this is really God, then he will lead these cows wherever they need to go. It will overcome their instincts. And so that's what they're trying to discern here. Again, one of the things to note, though, is like, you should never give Yahweh any graven image. And so they're trying, but they don't know Yahweh the way the people of Israel are supposed to know Yahweh. But they're trying to figure out, like, what are the things that would help? So the gold rats and tumors are not something that probably God needed or wanted, but they're just trying. They're like, we don't know what to do. And so there's a desperation here. So they did this. They took 2 such cows and hitched them to the cart and penned up their calves. They placed the ark of the Lord on the cart, and along with its chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. Then the cows went straight up to Beth Shemesh, keeping on the road and lowing all the way. They did not turn to the right or to the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. And so it's working. They're going. They're lowing, so they're like crying out, and the cows probably don't want to do this. They probably want to go back, but they keep moving forward. And so it is God doing the directing. And like, you think about, these kings are following the cart, like 5 kings following a cart with 2 cows and a gold box on it, and they're just like keeping his distance and just like, let's make sure this really goes where we want it to go. We don't want it to come back. And so it's a funny scene if you try to picture it all. And in the bag are 5 rats and 5 hemorrhoids. Now, the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley, and when they looked up and saw the ark, they rejoiced at the sight. And so the harvest time is like right now. May and June is when they would be harvesting the wheat. And so this is like when they're coming, and they're harvesting, they're working hard, and they just see 2 cows like coming down the road. What's this? And then the ark, the thing that they've been missing for 7 months, that all of Israel was grieving. Like, what are we going to do without the ark? And here it comes, just 2 cows carrying it to them. And then 5 kings just keeping their distance, going like, yeah, take it, get it out of here. And so the ark came to the field of Joshua at Beth Shemesh, and there it stopped beside a large rock. The people chopped up the wood of the cart and sacrificed the cows as burnt offerings to the Lord. Now these cows are female cows, and in the law, they're really only ever supposed to offer male animals in sacrifice. And so the people are not really following God's commands. That's just a small little note. Like, They're still not getting it totally right, but they're trying now. The Levites took down the ark of the Lord together with the chest containing the gold objects and placed them on the large rock. On that day, the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and made sacrifices to the Lord. The 5 rulers of the Philistines saw all this and then returned the same day to Ekron. And the one of the reasons why Beth Shemesh is significant is it is one of the Levitical cities that were distributed throughout the land. And so that the fact that it goes to Beth Shemesh, whether or not the Philistines knew that was what that city was, God is bringing it closer to where it needs to be with the Levites, not the house of Eli, because the house of Eli is, pretty much wiped out. They have other family members, but this is just some normal Levites who are the priestly class for the people of Israel. So the Philistines saw it and they took off. These are the gold tumors the Philistines sent as a guilt offering to the Lord, one each for Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And the number of the gold rats was according to the number of the Philistine towns belonging to the 5 rulers, the fortified towns with their country villages. The large rock on which the Levites set the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. But God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. And the people of Beth Shemesh asked, who can stand in the presence of the Lord, this holy God? To whom will the ark go up from here? Then they sent messengers to the people of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to your town. So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar, his son, to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained in Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. And so, so they celebrate. They're rejoicing. They're making sacrifices. They're feasting. But 70 men wanted to look into the ark, and they're not supposed to do that. They're technically not even supposed to look at it. Even when they were traveling, it was supposed to be covered. And so people weren't even looking at the ark. But these men were foolish enough to try. And if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, that probably is not exactly what happened here. But I mean, it's something that, the people were supposed to take seriously. And so when they see this, they mourn and they want to send it away again. So the Philistines are overwhelmed and they send it away. And now the people of Beth Shemesh, the Levites, who should know better, handle it foolishly, and they want to send it away. And so then it goes to Abinadab's house, and it will be there for the next 20 years. And that gives us a good window of how much time is going to happen from this moment to when David is going to first try to move the ark. The ark is going to stay here until David tries to move it to Jerusalem. So we have a 20-year window where 1 Samuel, the events of 1 Samuel, Saul's kingdom, David's running away from Saul, all of those things are going to happen. David's going to become king within 20 years. So the writer is giving us a little heads up. Like it's not going to stay here. I'll tell you more about that later, is kind of what the writer's getting at. But we'll get back to that. Like when my dad tells stories, he'll start going down the road and then I'm like, that's not the important part of the story right now. And then he comes back to where his main thought was. That's kind of what the writer is doing here as well. So, yeah, all right. So 7, then let's pick up here. The ark is in Kiriath Jearim, and then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. Awesome. This is great news. They were running away from God. They were trying to do things their own way. The ark comes back and the people turn back to God. And as we have seen earlier in chapter 4, The word of Samuel is spreading throughout Israel. So there's Samuel serving as a prophet, as a leader among the people. The ark is coming back to the people. This is good. And people are, it seems like we're on the right track, right? We'll see. So Samuel said to all the Israelites, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. And so the people were not to have any other gods before Yahweh, but here they have been picking up the gods of the Baals, and Ashtoreth is the plural for Astarte, and Astarte was Baal's consort. And so there is maybe an effort that the people were trying to say, well, if Baal has a wife, then maybe Yahweh needs a wife. And maybe that's why he's mad at us, is because he's lonely. And so they're taking this syncretistic worldview and bringing in the pagan religion into trying to worship Yahweh. And Samuel's like, none of that. Get rid of all of it, because you need to serve the Lord only. And so they agree to do this. Then Samuel said, assemble all Israel at Mizpah, and I will intercede with the Lord for you. And when they had assembled at Mizpah, they drew water and poured it out before the Lord. On that day, they fasted, and there they confessed, we have sinned against the Lord. Now Samuel was serving as leader of Israel at Mizpah. And so they draw water from a well, and they pour it out on the ground. And there is no commands in the law about pouring out water as a way of worshiping God. And so this may be just a simple symbol of the people saying, like, we know that water is not going to satisfy our thirst for God, for righteousness, for his goodness. And so they pour out the water, and they draw the water from a well and dump it out as like a kind of sacrifice, saying like what we really thirst for is more than water. Does that make sense? It's kind of a weird little thing that happens here, but they do it. It's not really something that's ever going to be happening again. Verse 7, when the Philistines heard that Israel had assembled at Mizpah, the rulers of the Philistines came up to attack them. They've got all these people having a church worship experience, and they're like, let's go. They're all there right now. Let's go attack. So they try to make the most of it. When the Israelites heard of it, they were afraid because of the Philistines. They said to Samuel, do not stop crying out to the Lord our God for us, that he may rescue us from the hand of the Philistines. Then Samuel took a suckling lamb and sacrificed it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord on Israel's behalf, and the Lord answered him. While Samuel was sacrificing the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to engage Israel in battle. But that day, the Lord thundered with loud thunder against the Philistines and threw them into such a panic that they were routed before the Israelites. The men of Israel rushed out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines, slaughtering them along the way to a point below Beth-kar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. He named it Ebenezer, saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they stopped invading Israel's territory. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines. The towns of Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to Israel, and Israel delivered the neighboring territory from the hands of the Philistines. And there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year, he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel all of those places. But he always went back to Ramah, where his home was, and there he also held court for Israel, and he built an altar there to the Lord. And so as they're panicking, and they cry out to Samuel to say, help us, he makes the sacrifice. And I love that he's making the sacrifice. He cries out to God, the Lord answered him. And the Lord didn't answer him by saying, like, all right, this is the plan. The Lord answered him in the thunder, in the chaos that he brought against the Philistines. That was the answer to his prayer. And the Philistines panic because the God that of the Israelites is now working against them again. This is the same God that gave those 5 towns hemorrhoids and rats, right? That's like, and people died. And I was like, it's happening again. Why do we keep coming after this God? And I don't know why they keep coming after these people, but they panic and they run away. And the people of Israel are victorious. And so he sets up another Ebenezer, another stone. And Eben is translated stone. Etzer is rescuer or helper. And it's the kind of rescue or help that God does when you can't help yourself. And so another time where the Lord uses that Etzer is in Genesis chapter 3 or chapter 2, when he sees that it is not good that the man is alone. And so he sends a helper suitable. Like, the man can't help himself. And so Eve is the rescuer in Genesis chapter 2. This is God's intervention on man's behalf. Like, you need this. And here we have another. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. We could not defeat the Philistines on our own. The Lord has helped us. And so they set up the Ebenezer stone. And so and we get this summary of his ministry saying, like, the Philistines stopped attacking, and land was restored. And Samuel didn't just stay in one place and say, y'all got to come to me. But he had about a 20-mile loop in some of the towns that he would go to. And when it says he judged Israel, it's not just like, how dare you, like judginess, but he administered justice for Israel. He was setting things right. And so where there was dispute, he brought clarity. He spoke as a prophet for the Lord in these situations. And so he would do these loops, but always come back home to Ramah, which is where he set up his home base. He set an altar there to make sacrifices. And that's going to be important when we get into next week as we see the rise of Saul. And so Samuel is here as a leader for the people. He's a representative of God. And so there are 3 offices that we see developed in the Old Testament: prophet, priest, and king. And we don't have a king yet. And so Samuel is a prophet, priest, and judge. And so he's leading, and while he's not a Levite, he was adopted into the priestly family. And so he's not a king, he's not really a priest, but he serves in this role of leadership that is closest to the anointed. And the anointed of God is also the Messiah. And so we read through the Old Testament and we see that God anoints people for his service. And so Samuel is actually going to be an anointer as well. So he's going to anoint Saul. He's going to anoint David, showing that this is the one that God has chosen. And so in this situation now, Samuel is in that role as the one God has chosen to lead Israel, but he will also pass that on. But this is really the high point for the book of Samuel, for Samuel anyway, because Saul, next week we'll see Saul is going to be a king, and he's going to do some good things, but he's also going to do some selfish things. And then that's going to leave from him. The anointing is going to leave from him, go to David, and Saul's going to try to kill David. And so most of Samuel now is going to be the conflict between Israel and the Lord, and then Saul and Samuel, and Saul and David. So there's going to be conflict and contrast throughout the rest of the book. So any questions? We went through 4 chapters in less time than it took last week, so that's a win. But any questions? Yeah, Michael. That is a really good question. After the exile, it was taken away, and the Bible doesn't tell us where it went. So there are people who think they know where it is, but we can't know for sure. But there are groups who have claims to it. The most prominent and probably most focused upon is a a sect in Ethiopia that has created their own little tabernacle, and there's a like a model of the tabernacle after the instructions in the Lord in the law, and they have somebody serving as a priest that is in there. But we don't know because they won't let anybody see it, and we don't need to know. Ultimately, like the ark is no longer necessary for God's interactions in the world. If it was, he would get it where it needs to be, right? Like if these passages tell us, like, if God wanted us to have it, if God wanted us to know where it was, we would know. Like God is never lost, right? And so, so we don't totally know, but there's that group in Ethiopia that thinks they have it or claims to have it. And then you watch Indiana Jones, and it could just be in a warehouse in the Smithsonian in a big old crate, but that's a fictional story, so I don't think that's true either. So, yeah, but good question. Kevin.
I thought it was interesting that the Philistines, when they had the ark and they were making the gold tumors and the rats, didn't try to open the ark and put those things inside.
Yeah.
Whereas the Israelites did try to open it.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? They created their own box, whatever, to put these other things in, but not put it in the ark.
Right. Yeah, that is interesting that they never tried to open it, or the Philistines never tried to put anything inside of it. Yeah, we don't get a reason here, but the best conjecture we could have is when they saw that the Dagon statue fell and was broken, that whatever this thing is, don't mess with it. And so, if the people were doing the sacrifices that they were supposed to be doing, every year they would sprinkle the ark with blood on the Day of Atonement. So it could also be that if there is enough blood all over the ark, like you might not really see that there's a crease there, that it can be opened. We don't know, like there's no instructions on cleaning the ark, right? It's like, no, you should sprinkle that every year. And so they might not have known, they might not have thought to try to open it. And that might be, God's protection on their foolishness. And the phrase for like the chest that they put it in could also be translated as pouch. And so for the tumors and the rats. And so that could have just been like a bag that they put next to the cart or next to the ark on a cart. So yeah, the worst thing that they could have done is probably like put it on like one of the poles as like here, you hold this. But yeah, I do. Yeah, there is a seriousness that the Philistines have with the ark and the things of Yahweh that the Israelites lack. And I think that's one of the contrasts that the writer is trying to also instill in us. And sometimes the expression familiarity breeds contempt. And so the people of Israel, like their familiarity with the things of God throughout the Old Testament leads to a lack of seriousness in treating and following God's laws. And so here the Philistines they have a much broader supernatural view of the world. And they're like, we don't, we think Dagon's stronger. We're wrong. Whatever this thing is stronger than Dagon. The Philistines recognize that there's spiritual warfare at work. The people of Israel have neglected that. And even in our day, like how many in the church are really engaging in the spiritual warfare that is around us? We talk about ancient idolatry, but there's idolatry all over the place in our culture. And we, there's a spiritual battle. And do we believe that the same God that had this power over Dagon and over the cities, that could put the weight of his hand on these people, do we believe that that same power, like we have access to that. We have access to the power of God. But that gets weird, right? It's like, whoa, that's pretty spooky. like how do we handle that? And it should never be like the people in Beth Shemesh are like, well, let's just see what this is all about, because that leads to destruction. But to come humbly before the Lord, and in chapter 7, when they're like, Samuel, please keep crying out to God. And Samuel's like, all right, I will. That's when the humble leadership of Samuel in that moment is like, y'all, we need to repent. We need to cry out to God. And that's when the transformation starts, is that repentance and crying out to God. Yeah. Any other questions?
Is the number 70 significant at all?
Well, the number 70 is actually interesting note. The textual tradition, and so ancient manuscripts, there are some disagreements on the translation of that number. And one is like 50,070, which is a lot. And especially for a town this size, like that would be too much. That would like be the whole town. And so then there's other ancient manuscripts that say 70. So there's even disagreement on what that actual number is. But most translators are saying this is more realistic of a number for a town that size, is 70. So it's not necessarily a representative of like complete destruction, or like whatever. And the number 70 might, like 7 is often this number of completion in the Bible, like 7 days in a week. And so there's some that might say like, well, maybe it was just a way of saying like everybody who looked in it died.
So I imagine there's some kind of a plan or conspiracy between this group of 70 saying, should we open it? Should we not open it? Because if one would have opened it and died, then there would only been one. Right?
Yeah, right. Well, probably, yeah. It's probably a bunch of people who were maybe partying a little too hard, and they're like, hey, let's all get up there. Let's sneak up on the Ark of the Covenant, and somebody's going to open it, and we're all going to see what's in there together.
Yeah, it had to be some kind of plan.
Yeah. I would imagine, because one person opening it should have been enough. You're good point. Yeah, but this story is reminiscent of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, who, when the tabernacle is dedicated, and the fire of God comes out from the ark and the Holy of Holies. Remember this, it comes out and it burns the sacrifice on the altar. And this is like the sign to the people, the tabernacle is open for business, and there is celebration. And the people are probably having all kinds of fun. And there's probably wine being drunk and all kinds of stuff. And Nadab and Abihu, most likely, were overzealous in their worship, and they were probably drunk, and they ran in to the Holy of Holies, and the text says bringing strange fire, which is also translated as unauthorized fire. They brought their censers into the Lord. The only person who's supposed to do that is the high priest. Nadab and Abihu are not high priests. They run in, and that same fire that burned up the sacrifices burned them up as well. We don't take the things of God lightly. And so here they're doing that again. Let's just see what's in here, and they're destroyed. And so, yeah, it's a intense moment. And the people are right, like to say, like, who can look upon this? Who can even look at this? And the truth is, you're not supposed to. Like, you're just not supposed to. There's supposed to be a tent that is covering the Holy of Holies, and only a few people are ever even supposed to move it. And so, so it's a intense moment. Any other thoughts or observations from these passages? Anyone online? We got a couple folks online. Anyone? No?
So the Israelites, when they moved the ark, they had very strict, these long poles.
Yeah.
And you couldn't even
Right.
stop it from tipping over. How did the Philistines didn't have the same standard?
Well,
touching it?
I think the Lord never gave them that law. And so they should not have it. And the Lord was already bringing punishment on them for even having it. And so I think the best thing to say is like, well, God never told them, the Philistines, how to move it.
Yeah.
So it's like all the stuff that's happening to them is a byproduct of their ignorance and disrespect of Yahweh. But it wasn't, they didn't know what to do. And so there's a little bit of grace here for these pagans to be able to say like, we don't want it. We don't take it. Lord, take it away. And so, so there's, why they were not struck dead for putting it on a cart. I think the Lord was like, well, I need to get it back here. And my people aren't brave enough to come down and get it. So, but it's a weird story. And it's like all of this is happening and the ark is the central piece here. And it's just a box in everybody's eyes. It's just a box with some angels on it, and like poles. But it is the representation of the glory of God. And wherever the glory goes, the power of God is on display. Yeah, it was covered in gold. And gold. So it was a wood box with gold around it. So it was very valuable, very, very desirable, probably. And the Philistines were like, this gold box is awesome. And that might be why they said, like, make these gold representations, is because, well, this thing's gold. So make gold tumors and rats, which again, gold hemorrhoids and rats. I don't even know what it would look like, but I don't know. It's so weird. Chris, you look shocked by something. No?
I was thinking something, I know I can't remember what it was, but I'll think of it again in a minute.
All right. Okay. Well, y'all, thanks for coming. Next week, we will keep on going and we'll meet Saul, and we will have a interesting look at a king who did not want to be king and was rebellious once he did become king. So but we'll go ahead and end this here, and we will be back next week. See y'all later.